I had 3 seconds to decide: let my abusive ex sell me to loan sharks, or dive into the back seat of a stranger's car in a dark Seoul parking garage. I chose the stranger. What I didn't know was that the man sitting in the shadows wasn't just any stranger. He was Lee Tae-hyuk, the Phantom of Seoul, the most dangerous criminal in the city, a man who spoke in whispers that determined life and death. When my ex found the car and started pounding on the tinted windows, screaming my name, I waited for this stranger to throw me out, to save himself the trouble. Instead, he did something that changed everything. His hand rested on my trembling shoulder, gentle, grounding, terrifying, and he made me a promise in that deadly, quiet voice. He will not touch you again. I'll protect you. Then we drove away, leaving my nightmare behind in the rearview mirror. But I didn't know protection from a phantom comes with a price. I didn't know he'd already bought my debt, my freedom, me. And I definitely didn't know that the most dangerous man in Seoul was about to make me his queen, or that I'd have to save his life to earn the crown. We drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. I stayed on the floor of the back seat, my body aching from the tension, too terrified to move. The city lights flickered through the tinted windows above me, painting shifting patterns of gold and shadow across the pristine leather interior. Eventually, the car slowed and began to descend. The artificial brightness of underground parking replaced the neon glow of Seoul's streets. When the engine finally went silent, the quiet was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thudding against my ribs. The rear door opened. I flinched instinctively, years of conditioning expecting violence. Instead, a hand appeared in my line of vision. Large, elegant, with that serpent tattoo curling around the wrist. The hand was steady, patient, offering, not demanding. "You can come out now," he said quietly. That same voice that had promised protection. Low and controlled, as if he were speaking to a frightened animal he had no intention of harming. I took his hand. His grip was firm but careful, and he helped me climb out of the car with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him. My legs were weak, shaking so badly, I nearly fell. He steadied me with his other hand on my elbow, holding me upright until I found my balance. I stood there in what was clearly a private parking level, sterile and bright with LED lighting. 2 other men in dark suits stood near an elevator, their postures rigid. When they saw us emerge, they bowed deeply, a full 90 degrees, and stayed that way until he gave a slight nod. They didn't look at me. It was as if my presence had already been anticipated, already processed, already accepted as fact. I finally looked at him fully, really looked at the man who had just altered the course of my life. Lee Tae-hyuk was devastatingly beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. High cheekbones, a sharp jaw, eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He looked to be in his early 30s, but there was something ancient in his gaze, something that had seen too much, done too much, survived too much. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, not a thread out of place despite the chaos of the last hour. He studied me with that same clinical assessment, taking in my disheveled appearance, my rain-soaked clothes clinging to my skin, the fear still vibrating through my entire body. "Take her to the East Wing guest suite," he said to one of the suited men, speaking in Korean. Then he switched to flawless, barely accented English for my benefit. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You're safe here. No one enters this building without my permission, and no one leaves with my property." Property. The word sent a chill down my spine, but strangely, it didn't terrify me the way it should have. With Sung-ho, being property meant being a punching bag, something to use and destroy. With this man, it sounded different. It sounded like being locked in a vault. Secured. Valuable. I wanted to ask questions. "Who are you? What do you want from me? Why did you help me?" But my voice had abandoned me completely. 3 years with Sung-ho had trained me not to speak unless spoken to, not to question, not to draw attention. Taehyuk seemed to understand my silence. He nodded once, a gesture of dismissal that was somehow not unkind, and I was led away down a corridor of glass and polished steel. The penthouse was massive, a sprawling palace suspended high above the city. Everything was sharp angles and cold beauty, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Seoul that made me feel like I was floating in the sky. The suite they brought me to was larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with Sung-ho. The bed was enormous, covered in silk sheets that looked like they cost more than everything I owned. The closet was already filled with clothes, designer labels, soft fabrics in various sizes, as if someone had prepared for every possibility. The guard who'd escorted me pointed toward the bathroom without a word, then left, the door closing with a soft click that somehow sounded like a lock engaging. I was alone. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the cold glass, looking down at the city below. Somewhere down there, Sung-ho was still looking for me, still raging, still believing I belonged to him. But up here, I felt untouchable. Trapped, yes, but in a different way. I had traded a cage of rust and violence for a cage of steel and silk. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the sun rise over Seoul, waiting for whatever came next. The next morning, I was brought breakfast by a silent maid who set down a tray of food that looked too beautiful to eat. Delicate pastries, fresh fruit, perfectly brewed coffee. I picked at it, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to accept nourishment. I spent the day alone, exploring the boundaries of my new prison. The suite had everything I could need: a bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in, a small library filled with books in Korean and English, even a desk with expensive stationery. But the door to the hallway was locked from the outside. I was being kept, however, gently. It wasn't until evening that I was summoned. The same guard from before appeared at my door. "Mr. Lee requests your presence for dinner," he said in careful English, gesturing for me to follow. I walked through corridors that felt endless, my bare feet silent on heated marble floors. I changed into one of the dresses from the closet, a simple black silk that fit perfectly, as if it had been made for my exact measurements. The thought unsettled me. He was waiting in a dining room that could have seated 30 people. But only 2 places were set, at opposite ends of an absurdly long table. Taehyuk stood when I entered, a gesture of unexpected courtesy. He'd changed into a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing more of that serpent tattoo coiling up his arm. "Sit," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair at the opposite end. I obeyed, feeling small and far away from him. The distance felt intentional, designed to make me feel isolated. Dinner was served by staff who moved like ghosts, present but invisible, efficient but silent. The food was exquisite, each course more elaborate than the last. But I could barely eat, too aware of his eyes on me, studying me with that same unreadable expression. We ate in silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. "You haven't asked me any questions," he observed, his voice carrying easily across the distance between us. "Most people in your position would have many questions." I set down my fork carefully, the soft clink against china unnaturally loud. "Would you answer them if I asked?" My voice came out smaller than I intended, rusty from disuse. A ghost of something, amusement, perhaps, flickered across his face. "That depends on the question." I gathered what little courage I had left. "Who are you?" "Lee Taehyuk," he said simply, as if the name should mean something to me. When I showed no recognition, he continued, "Some call me the Phantom of Seoul. I manage certain interests in this city." "You're a criminal." It wasn't a question. "I prefer businessman." He took a sip of wine, his movements precise and controlled. "But yes, by legal definitions, what I do exists outside the law." "Why did you help me?" This question seemed to give him pause. He set down his glass and leaned back in his chair, regarding me with that penetrating stare. "Because when I looked in your eyes in that garage, I saw someone fighting to survive. I respect that fight. And now I'm your prisoner." You are my guest, he corrected gently. There is a difference. Guests can leave. Can they? He tilted his head slightly. Tell me, Yunera, if I opened every door in this building right now, where would you go? Back to that basement apartment? Back to a man who was going to sell you like livestock. Hearing my name from his lips shocked me. I'd never told him. He'd known who I was before I ever climbed into his car. He saw the realization on my face and nodded slowly. I know everything about Choi Sung-ho. His debts. His desperation. His plan to hand you over to the Crimson Viper Syndicate to buy himself another month of breathing. His voice dropped lower, taking on an edge of cold steel. I know what he did to you. Every bruise. Every broken promise. Every night you went to bed wondering if you'd wake up at all. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. If you knew, why didn't you help me sooner? Because you hadn't asked for help yet. He stood from his chair and began walking toward me, his footsteps measured and deliberate. You had to make the choice to run, Era. You had to choose survival. I could only offer sanctuary once you reached for it. He stopped beside my chair, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. Close enough to run if he wanted to hurt me. But he just stood there, looking down at me with something in his eyes I couldn't name. You're safe now, he said quietly, with absolute certainty. He will never touch you again. No one will. You have my word. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this for a stranger? He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers brushed the fading bruise on my jaw, Sung-ho's goodbye gift. His touch was feather-light, reverent almost, tracing the evidence of violence with devastating gentleness. Because, he murmured, his voice dropping to that same deadly whisper from the car, you stopped being a stranger the moment you chose my sanctuary over certain death. You placed your life in my hands. That makes you mine to protect. His hand fell away, and he stepped back, restoring the careful distance between us. Finish your dinner, he said, his tone shifting back to business. Tomorrow, we discuss what comes next. He left me alone in that vast dining room, surrounded by luxury and silence, my heart racing from a touch that had felt more intimate than anything Sung-ho had ever done. I didn't finish my dinner, but I did sleep that night, for the first time in years, without fear of the door opening in the darkness. The phantom had promised protection, and somehow, impossibly, I believed him. The first week passed in a haze of silence and luxury. I moved through the penthouse like a ghost, still expecting punishment for taking up space, still flinching at sudden sounds that turned out to be nothing more than the wind against the windows or staff moving through distant corridors. I didn't see Taehyuk. He was gone before I woke each morning, returning late at night when I was already locked away in my suite. But evidence of his presence surrounded me. Fresh flowers appeared in my room daily. Books I'd glanced at in the library materialized on my nightstand. Clothes that fit perfectly continued to fill the closet, as if someone was studying my preferences and adapting accordingly. It was the afternoon of the 5th day when I finally learned what had happened to Sung-ho. The television in my suite had remained off since I arrived, but restlessness drove me to turn it on. I flipped through channels aimlessly until the news stopped me cold. A reporter stood outside a building I recognized immediately, the warehouse district in Yongsan, where Sung-ho used to meet his gambling contacts. Police continued to investigate the disappearance of multiple individuals connected to an illegal gambling operation, the reporter said in Korean, her face grave. Among the missing is Choi Sung-ho, wanted for questioning in connection with human trafficking charges. My hand trembled on the remote. They showed his photo, that face that had haunted my nightmares for 3 years. But seeing it on screen, labeled as missing, felt surreal. Authorities believe this may be connected to ongoing territorial disputes between criminal organizations, the reporter continued. The individuals vanished without a trace 4 days ago. 4 days. The same night I'd hidden in Taehyuk's car. I turned off the television and sat in the darkening room, processing what I'd just learned. Sung-ho wasn't coming for me. He couldn't. Whatever Taehyuk had done, and I had no illusions about his involvement, had been thorough and permanent. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt numb, empty, as if the fear that had animated me for so long had been supporting my skeleton, and now that it was gone, I didn't know how to stand. That evening, I was summoned to dinner again. But this time, when I entered the dining room, the absurdly long table was gone. In its place was a small, intimate table set for two, positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. Taehyuk stood waiting, dressed in a simple black sweater and slacks, less formal than before, but no less commanding. He watched me approach with those dark, assessing eyes. "Sit," he said quietly, pulling out the chair across from him. I obeyed, settling into the seat while he took his own. We were close now, close enough to speak without raising our voices, close enough that I could see the faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he slept as poorly as I did. Dinner was served, a beautiful array of dishes that smelled incredible. But my stomach clenched at the sight of food. 3 years of Sung-ho controlling every bite, criticizing every meal, using food as another weapon of control, had left its mark. I picked up my chopsticks but couldn't bring myself to take anything. My hands hovered over the dishes uncertainly. "You saw the news," Taehyuk said. Not a question. I nodded, setting down the chopsticks. "Is he really gone?" "Yes." Simple. Definitive. Final. "Did you kill him?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Taehyuk's expression didn't change. "Does it matter?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought it would. I thought I'd feel something, relief, guilt, anything. But I just feel nothing." "That's normal," he said quietly. "You've been running on survival instinct for so long that your body doesn't know how to process actual safety yet. It will come." He began serving food onto my plate, small portions, carefully selected. When he finished, he set down the serving utensils and looked at me expectantly. I stared at the plate. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten properly in days. The staff reports you barely touch your meals." Heat flushed my cheeks. "I eat enough." My name again, spoken with that same quiet authority that made it impossible to ignore. "Look at me." I raised my eyes to meet his. There was no judgment in his gaze. No disgust, only a calm intensity that demanded honesty. "He controlled your food," Taehyuk said softly. It wasn't a question. Somehow he knew, the same way he seemed to know everything about my private hell with Sung-ho. He made you feel like you didn't deserve to eat, like taking nourishment was something you had to earn or justify. Tears pricked my eyes. I blinked them back furiously. "In this house," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost gentle, "hunger is an insult to the provider. When I offer you food, it is not a test. It is not conditional. It is simply yours to take." He picked up his own chopsticks and took a bite, demonstrating. Then he set them down and leaned back slightly, giving me space. "You do not need to shrink yourself here," he said. "You do not need to make yourself smaller, quieter, less. You have the right to take up space, Era. You have the right to nourishment, to comfort, to safety." He paused, his eyes holding mine with unwavering certainty. "You have the right to exist without apology." Something cracked inside my chest, a small fissure in the armor I'd built around myself. My hand trembled as I picked up my chopsticks again. I took a small bite, then another. The food was exquisite, but more than that, it was mine. Given freely. Expected to be consumed. Not weaponized or withheld. Taehyuk watched me eat with something that might have been satisfaction, then resumed his own meal. We ate in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling below us like fallen stars. "Thank you," I whispered when I'd finished half the plate, more than I'd eaten in a single meal in months. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious, for giving me permission to exist. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You never needed my permission, Era. But if hearing it helps you remember your own worth, then I'll say it as many times as necessary. In that moment, sitting across from the Phantom of Seoul while he quietly dismantled every toxic lesson Sung-ho had taught me, I realized something terrifying. I was beginning to trust him. And trust, I knew, was the most dangerous thing I could offer a man who dealt in shadows and blood. 2 weeks into my sanctuary, Taehyuk decided my wardrobe was insufficient. He didn't ask if I wanted to go shopping. He simply appeared at breakfast, a rare occurrence that made the moment feel significant, and announced we were leaving in an hour. Where? I asked, startled by the sudden change in routine. You need proper clothes, he said simply, as if this explained everything. The items in your closet were emergency provisions. Now we get you what you deserve. The black sedan that had been my salvation waited in the private garage. This time, I sat beside Taehyuk in the back seat rather than hiding on the floor. The difference felt monumental. He worked on his phone during the drive, his presence a solid, grounding force beside me. We pulled up to a boutique in Gangnam that looked more like an art gallery than a clothing store. All white marble and gold accents, floor-to-ceiling windows displaying garments that probably cost more than I used to make in a year. My stomach knotted with familiar anxiety. I can't afford, I started. You're not paying, Taehyuk interrupted quietly, his eyes still on his phone. Go inside. My guard will wait by the door. Choose whatever speaks to you. He made a dismissive gesture, already returning to his call, speaking rapid Korean to someone about shipping schedules and territorial boundaries. Business. Always business. I stepped out of the car, feeling immediately out of place. The guard, a man named Juno who'd been assigned to me recently, took position beside the entrance with the stillness of a statue. Inside, the boutique smelled like wealth, expensive perfume and new fabric, and the particular scent of a space where ordinary people didn't shop. 2 sales associates looked up from behind a glass counter, their smiles practiced and perfect. Until they saw me. The smiles didn't exactly disappear, but they changed. Became thinner. More strained. I watched the assessment happen in their eyes. My simple clothes, my uncertain posture, the way I clearly didn't belong in a place like this. Can we help you? The taller one asked in Korean, her tone polite but cool. I'm looking for dresses, I said quietly, also in Korean, moving toward a rack of elegant silk garments. I felt them exchange glances behind me, heard the whisper of consultation. Then the shorter associate approached, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. I'm sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all, but I don't think we have anything in your size. Our pieces are designed for a more specific body type. Her eyes traveled over me with thinly veiled judgment. Perhaps the department store down the street would be more appropriate? They have a plus-size section. Heat flooded my face. The old shame rose up like acid in my throat. Every cruel comment Sung-ho had ever made about my body, every time I'd been made to feel like I took up too much space, every moment I'd tried to disappear. Of course. I'm sorry for wasting your time, I heard myself say, the apology automatic ingrained. I turned to leave, already retreating into that familiar smallness, when the boutique door opened. Taehyuk walked in. He'd finished his call. Something in my expression must have told him everything he needed to know, because his eyes went cold, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Calculation. He didn't come to me immediately. Instead, he walked directly to the sales associates, his movements unhurried and precise. Both women's faces transformed the moment they recognized quality in his tailored suit, his expensive watch, the aura of wealth and power that surrounded him. Mr. Lee, the taller one breathed, suddenly all deference. We didn't realize. Show me your sales records for the past quarter, Taehyuk said quietly. His voice was barely above a conversational tone, but it cut through the space like a blade.
I'm sorry.
The associate blinked, confused. Your revenue. Who owns this boutique? He pulled out his phone, already typing. Kim Enterprises, isn't it? I know Chairman Kim well. We have several business arrangements. The color drained from both women's faces. Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding, the shorter one started. Taehyuk held up one hand, silencing her. He made a call, speaking in Korean too rapid and low for me to fully catch, but I heard key phrases. Inappropriate treatment, discrimination, reputation damage. Reconsidering our partnership. He ended the call and looked at the associates with an expression of such cold indifference it was more cutting than rage would have been. Pack everything she touches, he said simply, and consider your employment status under review. Chairman Kim will be calling your manager within the hour. Then he walked past them to where I stood frozen, his hand coming to rest gently on the small of my back, a gesture of public claiming that made both associates' eyes widen. Show me what you like, he said to me, his voice softening in a way I'd never heard directed at anyone else. Loud enough for the entire boutique to hear, he added, You deserve beauty, Era. Let's find pieces worthy of you. For the next hour, Taehyuk personally selected garments. Not for me, with me. He had an impeccable eye, choosing elegant dresses in rich jewel tones, soft cashmere sweaters, tailored coats that made me look powerful rather than hidden. Every piece he held up for my consideration. He asked my opinion, waited for my approval. This color, he said, holding a deep emerald silk against me. It makes your eyes luminous. Do you like it? I nodded, speechless. Then it's yours. The associates scrambled to accommodate us, their earlier disdain replaced with desperate politeness. But Taehyuk barely acknowledged them. His focus remained on me, watching my reactions, noting what made my eyes light up, what made me stand a little straighter. When I tried on a midnight blue dress that fit perfectly, flowing over my curves like water, I emerged from the dressing room uncertain. In the mirror, I looked almost regal, but the old voices whispered that I was fooling myself. Taehyuk stood from where he'd been waiting. He walked a slow circle around me, studying the dress from every angle. Then he stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Beautiful, he said quietly. Not the dress.
Me.
This one is essential. And the emerald. And the gray cashmere. He glanced at the hovering associates. Everything we've selected. Have it delivered to my address within 3 hours. At the counter, he handed over a black card without looking at the total. But before we left, he turned back to the taller associate. One more thing, he said, his voice still that same quiet tone that somehow commanded absolute attention. The woman you insulted? She is under my personal protection, which means an insult to her is an insult to me. I trust the distinction is now clear. Both women bowed deeply, murmuring frantic apologies. In the car afterward, I sat in stunned silence. Taehyuk returned to his phone, his work, as if he hadn't just quietly demolished a business's reputation to defend my dignity. You didn't have to do that, I finally whispered. He looked up, his dark eyes finding mine. Yes, he said simply. I did. Why? Because you are mine to protect, he said, echoing the words from that first night. And protection isn't just about physical safety, Era. It's about ensuring the world treats you with the respect you deserve. He returned to his phone, the matter settled in his mind. But I sat there, feeling something shift inside my chest. Something that felt dangerously like belonging. 3 weeks into my gilded sanctuary, restlessness drove me to explore beyond the confines of my suite. Taehyuk was gone, another late night dealing with whatever darkness his business required. The penthouse felt too large, too silent, pressing in on me despite its vast spaces. I found myself wandering corridors I hadn't yet explored, my bare feet silent on heated marble. Most doors were locked, but one at the end of the west wing stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap. I should have turned back. I knew that even as my hand pushed the door open wider. The room beyond was clearly Taehyuk's private study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined two walls, filled with leather-bound volumes in Korean, English, and what looked like Japanese. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface meticulously organized, laptop closed, papers in neat stacks, a single pen aligned perfectly parallel to the desk's edge. Everything about the room spoke of control, order, a mind that allowed no chaos. I walked to the bookshelves, running my fingers along the spines. Philosophy, military strategy, economic theory, and tucked between volumes on game theory and territorial negotiation, a slim folder that didn't match the others. I pulled it out. The tab label made my blood run cold.
거의 세운 거.
My hands trembled as I opened it. I knew I shouldn't look. Knew that some knowledge couldn't be unlearned. But the compulsion was overwhelming, the need to understand what had really happened, what I'd truly walked into that night in the parking garage. The first pages were background, Sung-ho's gambling history, his debts, his escalating desperation. But it was the financial ledgers that made the room tilt around me. Column after column of numbers. Debts owed to various organizations, all consolidated under a single header stamped with a crimson logo, a viper coiled around a skull. The Crimson Viper Syndicate. The amounts were staggering. Sung-ho hadn't just been in debt. He'd been drowning, pulling down anything and anyone within reach. And there, near the bottom, a line item that made my stomach drop. Collateral, YA. Human asset. Market value estimated.
Me.
Reduced to initials and an estimated price. But it was the final page that shattered whatever fragile sense of safety I'd built. A transfer document, official and stamped, showing the total debt, over 200 million won, marked as paid in full. The transaction date was the same night I'd hidden in Taehyuk's car. The signature at the bottom was elegant, precise, unmistakable. Lee Taehyuk. The folder slipped from my numb fingers, papers scattering across the pristine floor. I sank into the leather chair behind the desk, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps.
He'd bought me. Not saved me. Bought me.
This wasn't rescue. It was acquisition. A business transaction between criminal organizations, and I was the asset that had changed hands. Every kind gesture replayed in my mind with a new, sinister context. The clothes, the food, the gentle insistence that I take up space, was that just him maintaining his investment? Polishing a piece of property before putting it to use? The protection he'd promised, the way he defended my dignity at the boutique, was any of it real? Or was it simply a man taking care of something he owned, the way someone might maintain an expensive car or a valuable piece of art? I sat there in the darkening study as the city lights flickered on outside, feeling the walls of my gilded cage close and tighter. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't even a person to him. I was a line item on a ledger, a strategic move in whatever war he was waging against the Crimson Viper. The kindness, the gentleness, the quiet authority that had made me feel safe, it was all just good asset management. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. My heart seized. I looked at the scattered papers on the floor, evidence of my snooping, and knew I couldn't hide what I'd found. Couldn't pretend I didn't know. The footsteps stopped outside the study door. I waited for Taehyuk to enter, my hands gripping the arms of his chair, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Was I a person to him? Or just a particularly troublesome acquisition that needed careful handling? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. The city hummed below, indifferent to the quiet devastation happening in this room. I'd thought I'd escaped one cage, only to find myself in another, more beautiful, but no less confining. The only difference was that this captor spoke softly, moved with grace, and made me believe, for 3 perfect weeks, that I might actually matter. The papers lay scattered around my feet like the remains of my shattered illusions. I didn't move to pick them up. Let him see. Let him know that I knew. Let him try to explain why he'd paid 200 million won for a woman he claimed to be protecting out of respect for her will to survive. I sat in his chair, in his private sanctuary, waiting for the phantom of Seoul to materialize from the shadows and tell me the truth. Was I his guest? His asset? His pawn? Or was I simply a transaction he was beginning to regret? The city lights blurred as tears finally came, silent and bitter. I'd been so desperate for safety that I'd walked willingly into another trap. And the worst part, the part that made my chest ache with a pain worse than any of Sung-ho's blows, was that I'd started to believe Tae-hyuk when he said I mattered. I'd started to believe I deserved the sanctuary he offered. I'd started to believe I was more than a commodity to be traded. But the numbers on that ledger told a different story. A story where Yoon-era was worth exactly 200 million won to the man who claimed to protect her. And nothing more. I didn't have long to sit with my devastation. The study door opened within minutes, but it wasn't Tae-hyuk who entered. Executive Director Park stepped into the room with the cold precision of a surgical blade. She was Tae-hyuk's second-in-command, a woman I'd glimpsed only in passing, always immaculate in tailored suits, always watching me with calculating eyes that saw through to the bone. She stopped when she saw me in Tae-hyuk's chair, surrounded by scattered papers. A thin smile curved her lips, sharp and humorless. "So," she said in flawless English, her voice smooth as ice, "you found the receipt." I stood, instinctively retreating from the authority in her presence. She walked forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and picked up one of the fallen pages. "I wondered how long it would take," she continued, studying the document. "You're smarter than you look, Yoon-era. Most assets don't go searching for the truth. They're content to live in the comfortable lie." "I'm not an asset," I whispered, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Park's laugh was brief and cutting. "Aren't you? Let me explain something about Lee Tae-hyuk that you clearly don't understand. He doesn't make emotional decisions. He doesn't bring strays home out of kindness. Every move he makes is calculated 3 steps ahead." She circled the desk, moving toward me with predatory grace. "The Crimson Viper has been encroaching on our territory for months. Your ex-boyfriend was one of their money launderers, small-time, pathetic, but connected to their network. By purchasing his debt, Tae-hyuk didn't just get you. He got legal claim to their operation, documentation of their activities, leverage." My throat constricted. "He used me." "He acquired a strategic advantage," Park corrected. "You were the key that unlocked a door we'd been trying to breach for years." She leaned closer, her perfume expensive and suffocating. "And here's the part you need to understand. The Crimson Viper will come for you. Not because they care about Choi Sung-ho. Not because they want you specifically, but because you represent a loss of face, a public acquisition of their property by their enemy." "I'm not property," I said, but my voice shook. "To them, you are. And when they come, and they will come, Tae-hyuk will be ready. He'll use you as bait to draw them out, then crush them." Her eyes held no warmth, no sympathy. "You're not a person in this equation, Era. You're a chess piece. And once the game is over, once the Crimson Viper is destroyed, what use does a phantom have for bait?" The words landed like physical blows. Everything I'd feared, everything the ledger had suggested, confirmed by the woman who knew Tae-hyuk better than anyone. "Don't mistake tactical advantage for affection," Park said, straightening. "He's protecting his investment, nothing more. Once you've served your purpose, that's enough." The voice came from the doorway, quiet but absolute. Tae-hyuk stood there, his expression unreadable, but something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. Park turned, unfazed. She needed to know the truth. "Your truth," Tae-hyuk said, stepping into the room. "Not mine. Leave us." For a moment, Park looked like she might argue. Then she bowed slightly, a gesture of deference that somehow conveyed disapproval, and walked out, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Taehyuk's eyes found the scattered papers, the open folder, the evidence of my discovery. He walked to his desk and picked up the ledger, studying it as if seeing it for the first time. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Am I just fate?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the fireplace across the room, a feature I'd barely noticed, more decorative than functional in the climate-controlled penthouse. He pressed something on the wall, and flames sprang to life behind the glass. Without a word, he held the debt ledger to the fire. I watched, stunned, as the papers curled and blackened, 200 million won worth of transaction records turning to ash. He held them until the flames nearly reached his fingers, then dropped the burning remnants into the fireplace. When he turned back to me, his expression was harder than I'd ever seen it, but his voice remained that same deadly calm. "I bought the debt, so no one else could claim you," he said. Each word was precise, measured, final. "I cleared the ledger, so you would belong to no one. Not the Crimson Viper, not Choi Sung-ho, not even me, unless you chose to." He crossed the distance between us, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Park sees the world in assets and liabilities because that's what makes her useful. She cannot comprehend why I would break my own rules. His jaw tightened. "I never bring complications into my home. I never let liabilities live. If you were just a tool, Era, I would have used you and discarded you the moment the Crimson Viper made their move." "Then what am I?" The question came out broken, desperate. "You are the only thing in this entire city I am afraid to lose." Before I could process those words, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, his expression darkening as he read the message. Without speaking, he turned the screen toward me. The image showed me standing at the penthouse window 3 days ago, photographed from an impossible angle from another building through a telephoto lens. The message beneath was in Korean, but Taehyuk translated quietly. "A debt is never truly paid. What was ours remains ours." My blood ran cold. The Crimson Viper had been watching. They knew exactly where I was, what I was doing. Park's prediction was already coming true. Taehyuk's hand closed around the phone, his knuckles white. "They've made their move," he said, his voice dropping to that lethal whisper that meant someone was about to die. "Now I make mine." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw beneath his controlled exterior. Not calculation. Not strategy.
Fear.
"You are not bait, Era," he said quietly. "Bait is disposable. You are the only thing I would start a war to protect." The declaration should have terrified me. Instead, standing in his study with ashes settling in the fireplace and a death threat glowing on his phone screen, I finally understood. I wasn't a transaction to him. I was the reason he was willing to burn his entire empire to the ground. The Crimson Viper had just declared war on the wrong woman, and the Phantom of Seoul was about to show them why. The underground auction was scheduled for the following night. Taehyuk intended to go alone, to face the Crimson Viper's leadership on neutral ground, a showcase of power where the city's criminal elite gathered to trade in things that couldn't be bought legally. He also intended to lock me in the penthouse's panic room until it was over. "Absolutely not," I said when he informed me of this plan over breakfast. My voice was steadier than it had been in weeks. Something had shifted after last night, after watching him burn the ledger, after hearing him call me the only thing he feared to lose. Taehyuk set down his coffee with deliberate precision. "This is not a negotiation, Era." "You're right. It's not." I met his dark eyes across the table, refusing to look away. "Because I'm going with you. The auction is dangerous. These are people who trade in weapons, information, and human lives. If violence breaks out, then you'll need every advantage you can get." I interrupted. "I spent 3 years listening to Sung-ho on the phone with his contacts. I know the Crimson Viper's network. I know their organizational structure, their key players, their business fronts. I pulled out my phone and showed him the notes I'd been compiling since midnight. Names, connections, shell companies I'd memorized from Sung-ho's drunk rambling and careless conversations. Information I'd absorbed and cataloged as a survival mechanism, never knowing it might someday be valuable. Tae-hyuk scanned the screen, his expression shifting from dismissal to interest. "You remember all of this?" "I remember everything," I said quietly. "When your survival depends on reading a room, on knowing who's dangerous and who's desperate, you learn to pay attention. I can identify their people, Tae-hyuk. I can tell you who doesn't belong, who's there to watch you, who's positioned for an attack." He was silent for a long moment, studying me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through skin and bone to the truth beneath. "If you come," he finally said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper, "you stay within arm's reach of me at all times.
You do not leave my sight.
You do exactly what I say when I say it. Understood?" I nodded. "Understood. And Era?" He stood, walking around the table to stand before me. His hand came up to cut my jaw, tilting my face up to his. "If bullets fly, I cannot promise I can stop them all. Are you willing to risk that?" I thought about the woman I'd been 3 weeks ago, the one who made herself small, who apologized for breathing, who believed she deserved nothing better than Sung-ho's cruelty. She would have retreated to the panic room without question. But I wasn't her anymore. "I survived 3 years with a monster," I said. "I can handle one night with phantoms." Something flickered in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or recognition. He released my jaw and nodded once. "Then we go together." The dress he selected for me was midnight blue silk, elegant and understated, with a high neck and long sleeves that concealed while somehow making me look regal. When I emerged from my suite that evening, Tae-hyuk was waiting in the foyer, devastatingly handsome in a black suit that made him look like death's most refined emissary. His eyes traveled over me slowly, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation in his gaze. Appreciation. Possession. Want. "Perfect," he said quietly, offering his arm. The auction was held in a converted warehouse in Yongsan, the same district where Sung-ho used to meet his contacts. The irony wasn't lost on me. We arrived in an unmarked sedan, and I felt Tae-hyuk's body tense as we approached, his hand moving to rest on the small of my back, protective and possessive in equal measure. Inside, the space had been transformed into a grotesque parody of elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed beams, casting glittering light over displays of illegal weapons, stolen art, and things I didn't want to examine too closely. Men and women in expensive clothes circulated with champagne glasses, discussing murder and money with the same casual tone others might use for weather. Tae-hyuk guided me through the crowd, his presence parting people like a blade through water. Eyes followed us, curious, calculating, hostile. I felt the weight of attention like physical pressure. "There," I whispered, nodding subtly toward a cluster of men near the weapons display. "The one in the gray suit, that's Park Min-jun. He runs the Crimson Vipers logistics in Gangnam. Sung-ho worked under him." Tae-hyuk's eyes flicked to the target, filing the information away. "And the woman beside him? I don't know her, but she's wearing their symbol." I'd spotted it immediately. A small crimson pin on her lapel, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. She's new to their upper ranks. We moved through the space, and I continued identifying players. The nervous waiter, who kept glancing toward the exits. The security guard whose stance was wrong, trained military, not private contractor. The photographer, who wasn't actually taking photos, just positioning cameras for surveillance. "You're remarkable," Tae-hyuk murmured against my ear, his breath warm on my skin. "I brought an entire security team to analyze this room. You've identified more threats in 10 minutes than they found in a week of planning." Before I could respond, a voice cut through the ambient noise, cold, cultured, dripping with false civility.
"Le Tae-hyuk."
How unexpected to see you at our little gathering. We turned to find an older man approaching, flanked by guards. He had the look of a snake that had learned to walk upright. Cold eyes, calculating smile, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the predator beneath. Chairman Vong, leader of the Crimson Viper Syndicate. His eyes slid to me, and recognition flickered across his face. And you brought such interesting company. Tell me, is this the little acquisition that's been causing all the fuss? Taehyuk's hand tightened on my waist, pulling me closer against his side. The gesture was clear, a claim, a warning, a line drawn in blood. She has a name, Taehyuk said quietly, his voice deadly calm. And she is under my protection. I trust the distinction is clear? Vong's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Oh, perfectly clear. Though I wonder, his eyes found mine, cold and assessing. Does she understand what kind of protection you're offering? Or has she simply traded one cage for another, gilded though it may be? I felt Taehyuk tense beside me, felt the violence coiling in his muscles, ready to strike. But before he could respond, I stepped forward slightly, meeting Vong's reptilian gaze with a steadiness that surprised even me. I understand exactly what I've chosen, I said, my voice quiet but clear. And I'd rather stand beside a phantom who values me than remain property to vipers who see me as collateral. The temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped 20 degrees. Vong's smile froze. Taehyuk's hand on my waist became almost gentle, a silent acknowledgement of my courage. Careful, little bird, Vong said softly. This world eats the bold. Then it's fortunate, Taehyuk said, his voice cutting like a blade, that she's no longer alone. The standoff held for a heartbeat longer before Vong retreated with a mocking bow, but his eyes promised violence to come. As he disappeared into the crowd, I realized my hands were shaking. Taehyuk noticed immediately, covering one with his own. You just declared war alongside me, he murmured. I know, I whispered back. There's no going back from this. I looked up at him, at the dangerous, beautiful man who'd burned a ledger to prove I wasn't property, who'd given me space to find my voice, who looked at me like I was worth starting wars for.
Good, I said.
I'm done running. His eyes darkened, with something that looked like reverence. Then let's finish this. The auction proper began an hour later, with guests seated in rows facing a raised platform where items were displayed and bids were called in hushed, coded language. Taehyuk and I sat near the back, positioned with a clear view of both the stage and the exits, strategic placement that was second nature to him. I tried to focus on the proceedings, but my attention kept drifting to the servers circulating through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't immediately identify what. Then I saw him, a young server in the standard black vest and bow tie, moving through the rows with a tray of crystal flutes. But his movements were wrong. Too stiff. His eyes darted constantly to our section, and his hands trembled slightly as he approached. 3 years of hypervigilance had taught me to recognize the physical markers of fear and intent. This man was terrified, but he kept coming closer, kept moving toward us with the determined focus of someone following orders they couldn't refuse. I watched him navigate the aisle, saw him pause to offer drinks to the couple in front of us. But his eyes never left Taehyuk. And when he reached into his vest pocket, supposedly for a cloth to wipe a spill, I caught the glint of a small vial. Time seemed to slow. The server was 2 rows away now. 1 row. His hand emerged from his pocket, fingers wrapped around something tiny and glass. He approached our row, his professional smile not quite reaching his terrified eyes. Champagne, he offered in Korean, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his upper lip. Taehyuk reached for a glass without looking away from the auction stage. I saw it happen in crystalline detail, the server's thumb pressing against the rim of one specific flute, a drop of clear liquid sliding down into the golden champagne, dispersing instantly. My hand shot out before conscious thought caught up with instinct. I knocked the tray sideways with enough force to send crystal shattering against the floor, champagne spraying across expensive suits and silk dresses. The auction stopped. Every head turned toward us. The server stumbled backward, his face draining of color as the small vial tumbled from his shaking fingers and rolled across the floor. Taehyuk moved with terrifying speed. He didn't look at the broken glass or the spreading champagne. His eyes locked onto the vial, then onto the server, who'd already begun backing toward the exit. "Secure him," Taehyuk said quietly to someone behind us, one of his guards I hadn't noticed positioning themselves nearby. Then his hand found my wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "We're leaving."
Now.
But Chairman Vong was already moving, rising from his seat near the front with that cold smile still fixed in place. "Leaving so soon, Taehyuk? The best items haven't even been presented." "Your hospitality has been noted," Taehyuk replied, his voice carrying that deadly calm that meant someone was about to die. "Along with your attempt at it." Vong's smile never wavered, but his eyes went flat and reptilian. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Accidents happen in crowded spaces." The room had gone utterly silent, the air thick with the promise of violence. I could feel the tension coiling around us, could see Vong's guards shifting position, surrounding the exits. Taehyuk pulled me closer against his side, his body a wall between me and the room. "Juno," he said quietly to the guard who'd materialized beside us, "the East Passage."
Now.
Everything happened at once. Juno moved toward a decorative panel on the far wall while another of Taehyuk's guards created a diversion, knocking over a display case with a crash that sent everyone's attention spinning. Taehyuk pulled me through the chaos toward the panel Juno had opened, revealing a narrow service corridor beyond. Behind us, I heard Vong's voice rise above the commotion, no longer bothering with civility. "No one leaves until we have a conversation about stolen property." We didn't stop. The service corridor was dark and narrow, smelling of dust and old concrete. Juno led us through a maze of passages clearly meant for warehouse workers, not auction guests. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind us, shouting, footsteps, the crack of a gunshot that made me flinch. Taehyuk's arm went around my shoulders, pulling me into a run. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Don't look back." We burst through a loading dock door into the cool Seoul night. The warehouse district spread around us, a labyrinth of industrial buildings and shipping containers, dark and maze-like. 2 cars were waiting, engines running. Taehyuk pushed me toward the nearest one. "Get in," he ordered, but his eyes were on the door we'd just exited, watching for followers. I scrambled into the back seat of a nondescript gray sedan, not the luxury vehicle we'd arrived in, but something designed to blend in, to disappear. Taehyuk slid in beside me, and the driver pulled away before the door had fully closed. Through the rear window, I saw figures emerge from the loading dock, Vong's men, armed and searching. But we were already blocks away, the gray sedan just another unremarkable vehicle in Seoul's industrial sector. My hands were shaking violently now, adrenaline crashing through my system. I'd just saved Taehyuk's life. Actually saved it. Seen the threat and acted before my mind could catch up with my instincts. Taehyuk turned to me, his dark eyes intense in the dim light of the moving car. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You saw it," he said quietly, something like awe in his voice. "The vial. You saw it before I did." He was scared, I whispered, my voice shaking. The way his hands trembled, the way he kept looking at you. I knew. "You saved my life, Era." He said it like a revelation, like he couldn't quite believe it. "You pushed me out of the way at the gala, would have been instinct. But this, identifying a threat I missed, acting before it reached me, that's different." His other hand found mine, threading our fingers together. You weren't just observing tonight. You were protecting me. The weight of what I'd done finally settled over me. I'd stopped an assassination attempt. I'd exposed the Crimson Viper's plan. I declared myself firmly on Taehyuk's side in a war that would now escalate beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Where are we going? I asked as the driver navigated through increasingly desolate streets. Somewhere they won't find us, Taehyuk replied. Somewhere I can keep you safe while I decide how to end this. His hand tightened on mine, and in his eyes I saw the same thing I'd felt when I knocked that glass away. The willingness to do violence, to burn the world down, to protect what mattered most. We'd crossed a line tonight, both of us, and there was no going back. The safe house wasn't safe. We arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, one of Taehyuk's emergency locations scattered throughout the city. The driver, a man named Miho who I'd seen around the penthouse, pulled into the loading bay and cut the engine. Wait here while I secure the perimeter, Miho said, stepping out into the darkness. Something in my gut twisted. I watched him disappear around the corner of the building, his movements just slightly off. Too casual, too unhurried for a man whose boss had just survived an assassination attempt. Taehyuk, I whispered, my hand finding his arm. Something's wrong. He'd already noticed. His body had gone perfectly still, that predatory stillness that meant he was calculating angles and odds and survival probabilities. His hand moved to the weapon I knew he kept holstered beneath his jacket. The way Miho moved, I said quietly, my mind racing through everything I'd observed. He's not securing anything. He's signaling. As if summoned by my words, the overhead lights blazed to life, flooding the warehouse with harsh fluorescent brightness. We were surrounded, men emerging from behind shipping containers and stacked pallets, at least a dozen of them, all armed. Miho reappeared, no longer bothering with a pretense of loyalty. Behind him walked Chairman Vong, that cold smile still fixed in place. Did you really think, Vong said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, that I wouldn't have insurance inside your organization, Taehyuk? You're not the only one who plans 3 steps ahead. Taehyuk's expression remained impassive, but I felt the tension coiling through him. He stepped slightly in front of me, placing his body between me and the guns. Miho's family has worked for me for 2 generations, he said quietly, and I heard the edge of betrayal beneath his controlled tone. His family also has debts, Vong replied. Debts I was happy to purchase. Along with his loyalty. He gestured, and his men began to close in, a tightening circle of weapons and malice. Now, I believe we have some property to reclaim. She's not property, Taehyuk said, his voice dropping to that lethal whisper. His hand found mine behind his back, squeezing once, a silent communication I couldn't quite decipher. Everything is property to the right buyer, Vong countered. And you've caused me considerable expense and embarrassment. I think it's time to settle both accounts. What happened next occurred in fragments, too fast to fully process. Taehyuk's hand released mine and found something in his jacket, not his gun, but a small device. He pressed it, and immediately every light in the warehouse died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Run, he commanded, his voice sharp and urgent in my ear. The east wall, 3rd container from the corner. There's a gap. Run, and don't look back. I heard the first gunshot, saw the muzzle flash like lightning in the darkness. Heard Taehyuk return fire, his movements impossibly fast and precise despite the chaos. But I didn't run. Instead, I pressed myself against the nearest shipping container, my mind racing through everything I knew about the Crimson Viper's structure, their methods, their patterns. Vong wouldn't have just bought Miho's loyalty. He'd have placed multiple assets, redundant failsafes. My eyes adjusted to the darkness. Emergency exit signs provided faint green illumination, just enough to make out shapes and movement. I watched the men spreading out, searching for us, and saw one moving differently from the others. He wasn't searching. He was flanking, moving with the practiced precision of someone who knew exactly where Taehyuk would position himself in a firefight. Someone who'd been trained by Taehyuk himself.
Junho.
The guard who'd helped us escape the auction. My breath caught. It made terrible sense. Juno had been the one to suggest this warehouse, had positioned himself as our protector while actually herding us into a trap. I saw him now, moving through the darkness toward where Taehyuk had taken cover behind a stack of pallets. Saw the rifle in his hands, the laser sight painting a red through the dusty air. Taehyuk was focused on Vong's men in front of him. He didn't see the traitor at his back. I didn't think. Didn't calculate. Just moved. I grabbed a length of metal pipe lying near the container, probably left by workers years ago, and ran toward Juno's position. My footsteps were masked by gunfire, my movement concealed by smoke and shadow. Juno's finger tightened on the trigger, the laser steady on Taehyuk's exposed shoulder. I swung the pipe with every ounce of strength I possessed, connecting with Juno's ribs with a sickening crack. He went down hard, the rifle clattering across concrete. His scream of pain and surprise cut through the chaos. Taehyuk spun toward the sound, his weapon raised. Saw me standing over Juno with the pipe still gripped in shaking hands. Saw the rifle on the ground, the laser sight still painting red across the wall where his head had been seconds before. Understanding flashed across his face. Then he moved. What followed was brutal and efficient. Taehyuk didn't kill Juno immediately. He needed information first. 3 precisely placed blows had the traitor talking, gasping out details about Vong's network, the other compromised guards, the full extent of the infiltration. With that information, Taehyuk transformed from cornered prey to apex predator. He used the warehouse's layout like a chessboard, turning Vong's numerical advantage into a liability. The shipping containers became cover and obstacles. The darkness became his ally. I stayed low, staying out of his way, but refusing to run. I called out positions when I spotted movement, warned him of flanking attempts, used my knowledge of the Crimson Viper's tactics to predict their next moves. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were fighting as a unit. When the emergency lights finally flickered back on 20 minutes later, the warehouse was silent except for our ragged breathing. Vong's men were down, dead, unconscious, or fled. Vong himself had retreated when the tide turned, disappearing into the Seoul night like the snake he was. Taehyuk stood in the center of the carnage, blood on his knuckles, his suit torn, his dark hair disheveled. He looked like the phantom he was named for, dangerous, beautiful, terrifying. His eyes found me across the space. I was still holding the metal pipe, still standing over Juno's unconscious form. He crossed the distance between us in long strides.
Didn't speak.
Just dropped to his knees in front of me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his face pressing against my stomach. He was shaking. "You didn't run," he said, his voice muffled against the silk of my dress. "I ordered you to run, and you stayed." I set down the pipe and brought my hands to his hair, holding him against me. "I told you I was done running." He looked up, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before, raw vulnerability, the mask completely stripped away. "You identified the threat I missed." Again. His hands tightened on my waist. "You saved my life." Again. "We saved each other," I corrected quietly. He stood, pulling me flush against him, one hand cradling the back of my head. "You were supposed to be the one I protected," he whispered against my hair. "How did you become the one protecting me?" "Maybe," I said, looking up at him. "We were always meant to protect each other." Something shifted in his expression, a decision made, a line crossed, a truth finally acknowledged. The Phantom and his queen, standing together in the wreckage of a war we'd fight side by side. The war with the Crimson Viper ended not with a bang, but with silence. Within 72 hours of the warehouse confrontation, Chairman Vong's operations crumbled like a house built on sand. The information Juno had given up, names, locations, financial trails, allowed Taehyuk to dismantle their network with surgical precision. Vong himself disappeared, rumored to have fled to Singapore or Shanghai, leaving behind a power vacuum that Taehyuk quietly filled. The message was clear to Seoul's underworld. The Phantom had won, and the woman who stood beside him was not to be touched. I watched it all happen from the penthouse, but I wasn't a passive observer anymore. Taehyuk included me in strategy meetings, asked for my input on organizational structure, listened when I identified patterns in the Crimson Viper's remaining assets. Executive Director Park watched these exchanges with barely concealed resentment, her cold eyes tracking every moment Taehyuk deferred to my judgment. It came to a head 1 week after the warehouse. I walked into Taehyuk's office to find Park already there, her posture rigid, with controlled fury. She turned when I entered, her expression icy. "This is a private meeting," she said sharply. "Actually," Taehyuk said from behind his desk, his voice quiet but absolute. "I asked Era to join us." Park's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, giving her this much access. She's a liability." "She's the reason I'm alive," Taehyuk interrupted, his tone still calm but edged with steel. "She identified 2 assassination attempts that your security protocols missed. She provided intelligence that won us a war. And she proved her loyalty when she had every opportunity to run. She's also untrained, inexperienced, and emotionally compromised," Park countered. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment." "No," Taehyuk said, standing. "I'm recognizing value that you refuse to see because it threatens your position." He walked around the desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Your services have been invaluable, Director Park. But your inability to adapt to changing circumstances makes you a liability I can no longer afford." The words landed like a death sentence. Park's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You're removing me? For her?" She gestured at me with barely restrained contempt. "A woman who stumbled into your car by accident?" "I'm removing you," Taehyuk said quietly, "because you mistake control for strength, and you've forgotten that loyalty flows both ways. You're being relocated to our Busan operations. Effective immediately." It wasn't a discussion. Within an hour, Park was escorted from the building, her office cleared, her access revoked. I watched from the window as her car pulled away, feeling both vindicated and strangely sad. She'd been right about one thing. I was inexperienced, untrained, operating purely on instinct and observation. But I'd also been right when it mattered most. That evening, Taehyuk came to my suite as the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. He was dressed simply, black slacks and a white shirt, no jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked less like the Phantom and more like a man carrying something precious. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. I took it without hesitation. He led me not to the dining room or his office, but to a private elevator I'd never noticed before. It rose past the penthouse level, stopping at what had to be the building's roof. The door opened onto a space I hadn't known existed, a rooftop garden, intimate and carefully maintained, with Seoul spreading out below us like a kingdom of lights. The night air was cool, the city sounds muted by distance and height. In the center of the garden, a small table had been set with candles that flickered in the breeze. But Taehyuk didn't lead me there. Instead, he brought me to the edge of the roof, where the view was unobstructed, the entire city visible, glittering and alive. "When I was young," he said quietly, still holding my hand, "my father brought me up here and told me that everything I could see would someday be my responsibility. Not my possession, my responsibility. The difference matters." He turned to face me, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "I've spent 15 years ruling alone, Era. Building an empire on control and fear and calculated distance. I thought that was strength. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me that true strength isn't standing alone. It's choosing the right person to stand beside. He released my hand and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small black velvet box. My breath caught. But when he opened it, the ring inside wasn't a diamond engagement ring. It was heavy jade set in platinum, a signet ring bearing an intricate seal I'd seen before on documents in his office. The Lee family crest. This belonged to my father, Tae-hyuk said, his voice quiet but steady. And his father before him. It's worn by the head of the family, the leader of our organization. It represents authority, responsibility, and the burden of protecting what's ours. He took the ring from the box and held it up to the candlelight. The jade seemed to glow from within, ancient and powerful. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he said, meeting my eyes. "I'm asking you to rule beside me. Not as my possession, not as my protected asset, but as my equal, my partner in everything." Tears blurred my vision.
Theo.
"You've earned this," he interrupted gently. "Not because you saved my life, though you did. Not because you won me a war, though you did that too. But because when you had every reason to stay silent and small, you found your voice. When you could have run, you chose to fight. When the world told you that you were worthless, you proved them wrong." He took my hand again, his touch reverent. "I promise to protect you, Era. But what I'm offering now isn't protection, it's partnership. The throne beside mine. The authority to command everything I've built. The weight and the glory of it, shared equally." He slid the heavy ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. "You are not my queen because I made you one," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper that was ours alone. "You are my queen because you claimed the title yourself, one brave choice at a time." I looked down at the jade ring on my finger, then up at the man who'd given me sanctuary when I had nothing, who'd taught me my worth when I'd forgotten it, who now offered me not just safety, but sovereignty. "I accept," I whispered. He pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine, his hands cradling my face like I was something infinitely precious. "Then let them know," he murmured. "Let the entire city know that the Phantom no longer rules alone." Below us, Seoul glittered, a kingdom of shadows and light, danger and beauty, all of it spread at our feet. I'd come to this city broken, believing I deserved nothing better than cruelty. I'd hidden in a stranger's car, seeking only to survive one more night. But I'd found something I never expected. Not just safety, not just protection, but power. Purpose. Partnership with a man who saw my worth before I could see it myself. The girl who'd cowered on a car floor was gone. In her place stood a queen, crowned in jade and tested by fire, ready to rule beside the most dangerous man in Seoul. Tae-hyuk kissed me then, slow and deep and claiming, with the city spread below us and the stars above us and nothing but possibility between us. "Welcome home," he whispered against my lips. And for the first time in my life, standing on that rooftop with a Phantom's ring, I truly was home.